The dust hung in the air like a curtain of golden fire, each particle catching the Afghan sun and turning the valley into something that shimmered between dream and nightmare. Reese Harlow pressed her back against the boulder, feeling the heat of the stone through her tactical vest, feeling the weight of 85 pounds of ammunition cutting into her shoulders like the hands of ghosts pulling her down into the earth. Her father had died in dust like this. Different continent, different war, but the same taste of copper and fear mixing on the tongue. She'd been 6 years old when they folded the flag and handed it to her mother. Now, she was 24.
Target spotted.
And she could feel him
We need
in
to
every
move
grain
now.
of sand that worked its way into her boots, into her rifle, into the spaces between her heartbeats. Harlow, you good back there?
Remember, the key to effective
Corporal
handling
Tyson
is
Kemp
maintaining control and
didn't
awareness
turn
at
around
all
when
times.
he spoke. His
Watch the
eyes
grip
stayed
and
locked
stance.
on the ridgeline ahead, scanning for threats through the Schmidt and Bender scope mounted on his M110. The question wasn't really a question. It was the sound you made to fill the silence before contact, before the moment when silence became the most precious commodity in the world. Roger, Corporal. I'm good. She wasn't good. Her left shoulder felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through the joint. Her mouth tasted like she'd been chewing on battery terminals. The temperature was pushing 108 degrees, and she'd already gone through 2 liters of water on the approach march. But good was relative. Good meant you could still move. Good meant you could still fight. Good meant you weren't the one being carried. The team moved like a single organism through the valley floor. 8 men and 1 woman, flowing around obstacles with the fluid grace that came from 1,000 hours of training and a dozen missions that tested whether that training meant anything at all. Lieutenant Garrett Nash walked point, his M4 carbine tucked tight against his shoulder, his head on a swivel. Behind him came the breacher, the radio man, the medic, Dawson Cole, with his aid bag, riding high on his back like a hunchback's burden of hope and morphine. And at the back, hauling the ammunition that would keep them all alive when the shooting started, walked Reese Harlow from Laramie, Wyoming, daughter of Ranger Quinn Harlow, who'd bled out on a Mogadishu street 18 years ago, covering a withdrawal he'd never be part of. She'd been carrying weight her whole life. First, it was the weight of her father's absence, the empty chair at every birthday, every graduation, every moment that needed a father's hand on a shoulder and found only air. Then it was the weight of her grandfather's expectations, the old Korean War vet who'd taught her to shoot when she was 7, because that's what Harlow women did when their men went to war and didn't come home. They learned to shoot, so the next generation would have a fighting chance. By the time she was 17, Reese could put 5 rounds through a target the size of a quarter at 300 yards. By the time she was 20, she'd logged over 2,000 hours behind a rifle scope, burning through ammunition she bought with paychecks from waitressing at the Buckhorn Bar and teaching herself the mathematics of wind and elevation and the Coriolis effect that made bullets drift right in the Northern Hemisphere. But none of that mattered when she enlisted in 2009 because the policy was clear. Women could serve, women could deploy, women could bleed and die right alongside the men. They just couldn't pull the trigger in direct combat roles. That privilege was reserved for those who pissed. Standing up, so she carried ammunition instead. 85 pounds of magazines and belts and boxes that turned her into a pack mule with a college degree and a security clearance. The men in her unit treated her with the careful respect they'd give to a piece of equipment that might file a complaint. Not hostile, not friendly, just professional. She was the ammo bearer. She hauled the bullets. When Kemp needed to reload, she'd be there. That was the deal. The valley narrowed ahead, the walls rising up on either side, like the cupped hands of something ancient and cruel. Nash raised a fist, and the team froze, each man dropping into a knee, weapons scanning outward in overlapping fields of fire. Reese took the opportunity to adjust her pack, rolling her shoulders and feeling the straps dig into different parts of her trapezius muscles. Pain was a clock. You learned to tell time by which parts hurt the most. Behind her, a voice spoke in the tone of someone who'd learned to whisper in places where whispers carried like shouts. You handle that weight better than most men I've seen. Master Sergeant Callan Bridger moved like smoke despite being 57 years old and carrying enough scar tissue to upholster a couch. He'd come up through Delta Force, back when they called it something else, and didn't talk about it in public. Now, he was a senior combat advisor, which meant he was too valuable to leave behind and too old to be running point. So he walked with the command element and watched everything with eyes that had seen Mogadishu burn and lived to tell exactly none of it to anyone who didn't have the clearance. They called him Flint because of the way sparks flew when he got angry. Reese nodded acknowledgement, but didn't speak. You didn't chat with master sergeants unless they asked you a direct question. But Flint wasn't done. I knew a ranger once who moved like you. Smooth economical, like you're thinking 3 steps ahead about how to distribute the load. Something in Reese's chest went very still. His name was Quinn Harlow, Mogadishu, October 3rd, 1893. You related. The world narrowed down to a pinpoint of absolute focus. 18 years she'd been living with a ghost, and now a man who'd watched that ghost die was standing 3 feet away asking about family trees. He was my father. Flint's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, some calculation being revised in real time. I was pinned down at the second crash site, Super 6-4. We had Somali militia coming from 3 directions, and our air cover was Winchester. Your father's fire team came through hell to pull us out. He took 2 AK rounds in the chest covering our extraction. I carried him 100 meters before the bleeding stopped his heart. Reese felt her throat close up. She'd heard a dozen versions of how her father died. Official reports that used words like engaged hostile forces and sustained fatal injuries, and turned a man into a statistic. Now, she was hearing it from someone who'd felt the weight of his body, who'd watched the light go out in eyes that were supposedly just like hers. He saved 11 of us that day. I've been living on borrowed time ever since. Flint reached into his vest and pulled out a photograph creased and worn from being carried through 18 years of deployments. It showed 2 men in desert camouflage arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they'd just won the lottery. One of them was Flint younger, but already carrying that 1,000-yard stare. The other was a man Reese had only seen in her mother's wedding album, her father. On the back in handwriting she'd never seen, but somehow recognized were 8 words. For Flint, we all go home, or none of us do. Quinn, why are you showing me this now? Flint's eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that felt like being X-rayed. Because I see him in the way you move, in the way you watch the high ground when you think no one's paying attention. Your father had a gift. He could read terrain like other people read newspapers. He'd see things before they happened, feel the setup before the ambush sprung. He paused, and in that pause, Reese could hear the wind moving through the valley, could hear the click and shuffle of the team checking weapons and adjusting gear. I think you've got the same gift, and I think today's the day you're going to need it. Before Reese could respond, Nash's voice cut through on the squad radio. All elements were 5 mics from the objective. Kemp, I want eyes on that compound in 3. The team rose and moved, and Flint melted back into the formation like he'd never been there at all. But Reese could feel the weight of that photograph in her memory, like she was carrying it in her own vest. Her father's handwriting, his face, his promise that everyone goes home. She wondered if he'd known when he wrote it that sometimes you kept that promise by staying behind. The compound came into view as they crested a low rise, a cluster of mud brick buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Intel said Khalid the Viper was inside, planning an attack on the provincial governor. Intel said he'd have maybe 6 guards. Intel said this would be a clean surgical strike. Reese had learned not to trust Intel. She scanned the surrounding ridges while Kemp set up his hide unpacking his rifle and settling into a shallow depression that gave him overwatch on the target building. She knelt beside him, arranging magazines and ammunition boxes within easy reach, creating a system where he could reload without looking where his hands could find what they needed in the dark or under fire. You're good at this, Kemp said, his eye pressed to the scope. Practice. You shoot some. It wasn't a lie. Some was accurate. Some people climbed mountains. Some people painted. Some people spent 2,000 hours learning to make bullets go exactly where they intended from distances that turned human beings into abstract geometry problems. Kemp didn't press. He'd settled into his zone, that place snipers went, where the world became nothing but wind and distance and the mathematics of making metal meet meat. Reese had been in that zone herself, in the privacy of her own time on ranges where no one was watching and keeping score. She settled into position beside him and did what she was trained to do. She watched. She waited. And she saw what the others missed. The cigarette butts near the rocks 50 meters to their left. Fresh. Still smoldering. The way the dust moved wrong on the far ridge, like something had disturbed it recently. Something heavier than wind. The boot print pressed into soft earth tread pattern, wrong for local fighters, right for Russian-made military boots. Her heart rate kicked up a notch. Corporal, we've got fresh sign. Multiple positions. I don't think we're alone. Kemp pulled back from his scope, long enough to glance where she indicated. Could be from earlier patrols. Those cigarettes are Turkish blend. Taliban smoke local. Now Kemp was interested. He scanned the area as Reese had marked, and she saw his jaw tighten. Nash Kemp, we might have a problem. The lieutenant materialized beside them like a ghost with a radio and a concerned expression. Talk to me. Harlow's picked up indicators of foreign fighters. Fresh sign, wrong equipment, wrong tobacco. Nash looked at Reese. Really looked at her for the first time since they'd left base. You sure? No, sir, but I'd bet my paycheck. Nash pulled out his own binos and glassed the area. When he lowered them, his expression had shifted from concern to troubled. I've got 7.62 by 54. Romeo casings. That's Dragunov. The temperature in Reese's body dropped 5 degrees. Dragunov meant Russian sniper rifles. Russian rifles meant professional shooters, probably Chechen mercenaries who hired out to the highest bidder. This wasn't 6 local Taliban guards. This was something else entirely. Nash keyed his radio. All elements hold position. We've got possible Tier 1 enemy advisors in the area. Flint, I need you up here. The master sergeant appeared 30 seconds later, moving with the economy of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on anything that didn't increase your chance of survival. He listened to Nash's assessment, examined the evidence himself, and then did something that surprised everyone. He looked at Reese. What's your gut say, Harlow? Every head in the immediate area turned toward her. She could feel their attention, like heat lamps could feel the weight of the question that wasn't really about cigarette butts and boot prints. It was a test. Maybe the test. The one that decided whether you were a person or just a piece of equipment. She took a breath and let her eyes go soft, taking in the entire valley at once instead of focusing on individual details. It was a trick her grandfather had taught her, how to see the pattern instead of the parts. We're in a funnel. High ground on 3 sides, only one way out. If I was setting an ambush, this is where I'd do it. Let the target walk into the bowl, then collapse the sides. Flint's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. That's how they got us in Mogadishu. Let us land. Let us move into the city, then close the trap. Nash was already on the radio, calling for a situation update from higher command. While he talked, Reese kept scanning, kept watching, kept seeing things that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up and salute. Movement on the far ridge. Just a shadow, just a shape, but moving with purpose. A glint of reflected sunlight from a position that should have been in shadow. The way the birds had stopped singing 5 minutes ago. She opened her mouth to say something, to give one more warning to the world exploded. The first round came in supersonic arriving before the sound of its firing, and it missed Lieutenant Nash's head by less than 3 inches. The crack of the bullet's passage was followed instantly by the rolling boom of the rifle shot echoing off the valley walls, and then the world became nothing but noise and violence, and the animal imperative to get horizontal before the next round arrived. Reese hit the ground hard, the weight of her pack driving the air from her lungs and pinning her like a beetle to a card. Rounds were snapping through the air above her head, that distinctive supersonic crack that meant someone was shooting at center mass and missing high. She clawed at the straps of her pack, trying to get free, trying to get mobile, trying to become something smaller than the target she currently represented. Kemp was firing controlled pairs, his rifle barking in rhythm. Nash was shouting into the radio, calling for fire support that wouldn't arrive for 45 minutes if it arrived at all. Dawson Cole was dragging a wounded radio man behind cover, his hands already red with someone else's blood, and Reese was stuck under 85 pounds of ammunition, watching the battle through a gap in the rocks, counting muzzle flashes, and doing the math that said they were fucked. 14 separate firing positions, maybe more. Coordinated fire, professional spacing, high ground, cover, interlocking fields of fire. This wasn't six guards. This wasn't even Khalid the Viper and his entourage. This was a kill box, a trap, an ambush set by people who knew exactly what they were doing and had been waiting for exactly this moment. Intel had been wrong. Intel had been catastrophically, lethally wrong. And now, the only question was whether anyone would live long enough to file the after-action report. Reese finally got the pack straps loose and rolled free, scrambling on hands and knees to the cover of a larger boulder. Rounds were chewing up the ground around her, kicking up geysers of dirt and rock fragments that stung her exposed skin like angry hornets. She made it to cover and pressed her back against stone that was already pockmarked with bullet impacts. Her heart was trying to hammer its way out through her sternum. Her hands were shaking. Her mouth tasted like pennies and terror. This was it. This was the thing her father had faced in Mogadishu. The moment where training met reality and you found out which one was stronger. She forced herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Just like on the range. Just like her grandfather had taught her when she was 7 years old, and learning that shooting wasn't about pulling a trigger, it was about controlling everything else. Kemp was 20 feet to her left, firing and displacing, trying to suppress the enemy positions, but fighting uphill against numbers and elevation. Nash was organizing the team into some kind of defensive posture, trying to create a perimeter that would hold long enough for extraction. Flint was beside her, suddenly appearing, like he'd teleported, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "You hit. No, Master Sergeant. Good, because this is going to get worse before it gets better. Stay low, stay smart, and remember." Another volley of fire cut him off. Reese saw the impacts stitching across the rocks above their heads, saw Flint flinch as stone fragments peppered his face. When the firing paused, he finished his sentence. "Remember that your father made it out of situations worse than this. You've got his blood. Use it." Then he was gone, moving to Nash's position, leaving Reese alone with the ammunition and the sound of her own breathing, and the growing certainty that today was the day she was going to find out if genetics meant anything when bullets were flying. She looked at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. She looked at the ridgelines where muzzle flashes marked enemy positions, like candles on a birthday cake from hell. She looked at Kemp, burning through magazines, trying to do the job of 3 shooters with 1 rifle. And she looked at her pack, at the boxes of ammunition she'd carried 3 kilometers through the Afghan heat, and realized that bullets didn't care who loaded them. They didn't care about policy or regulations or the careful distinctions between combat and combat support. Bullets only cared about finding their target. And Reese Harlow, daughter of Quinn Harlow, who died in Mogadishu buying time for 11 men to live, knew exactly how to make bullets find their targets. She just needed someone to give her permission. The firefight intensified. Somewhere off to the right, she heard Cole screaming for a medic, which meant Cole was working on someone and needed help, which meant they had at least 2 casualties now, and the tactical situation was degrading faster than their ammunition supply. Reese low-crawled to Kemp's position, dragging a box of magazines with her. "Corporal, how much you got left?" 3 mags, maybe 4 minutes at this rate." "I've got 30 more mags in my pack." "Then start passing them forward, Harlow. This ain't a fucking tea party." She started feeding him magazines, watching his technique, watching the way he acquired targets and made the tiny adjustments for wind and distance. He was good. Maybe very good. But he was alone, and there were at least 14 enemy shooters, and the math said he couldn't win this with skill alone. He needed numbers. He needed another rifle in the fight. He needed the bolt on his M110 locked back, empty. He reached for a fresh magazine, and Reese slapped it into his palm before he'd finished the motion. He dropped the empty seat of the fresh mag, released the bolt, acquired his next target, and the rifle made a sound no rifle should make. A grinding crunch of metal on metal. A jam. Not a simple failure to feed, but something mechanical and catastrophic and completely unsurvivable in a firefight. Kemp's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, denial, rage, then acceptance. Fuck, fuck. Nash Kemp is down, rifle's fucked. The words seemed to echo across the valley, and Reese could swear the enemy fire increased in response, like they'd been listening, like they knew that losing the primary sniper meant the tactical situation had just shifted from bad to terminal. Nash's voice came back tight with stress. Can you clear it? Negative. Feed system's damaged. I need the backup rifle. The backup rifle. Reese knew where it was. Kemp's spare M110 packed in his secondary kit bag, which was currently sitting in the open ground about 15 feet from cover. 15 feet. That might as well have been 15 miles given the volume of fire coming down range. Kemp saw where she was looking. Harlow, don't even think about. She was already moving. Later, she wouldn't remember making the decision. She'd remember being behind cover 1 second and sprinting the next. Her boots hammering the hard-packed earth. Her breath coming in sharp gasps, her entire world contracting to the distance between here and there. The enemy saw her. They had to. Because the fire shifted rounds, snapping past her head, kicking up dirt at her feet, cracking through the air so close she could feel the supersonic wake like someone slapping her face. She reached the kit bag and didn't slow down, just scooped it up with both hands and kept her momentum going. Kept her legs pumping. Kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and she wasn't done yet. Something hot kissed her left calf. Not a full hit, just a fragment of something shrapnel or stone or a bullet that had hit something else first. It burned like touching a stove, but she didn't stop, didn't slow, just crashed back into cover and rolled, coming up with the kit bag clutched against her chest like it held the secrets of immortality. Kemp was staring at her like she'd just grown a second head. You're insane. You know that, completely fucking insane. You needed the rifle. I need you to not get killed getting it for me. But he was already unzipping the bag, already pulling out the backup rifle, already checking the chamber and the scope and the magazine well. And Reese was leaning against the boulder, feeling the adrenaline starting to ebb, feeling the burn in her calf, where something had cut through her pants and drawn a line across the muscle. She looked down. Blood, but not much. A graze. She'd been lucky. Her father had been lucky too, right up until Mogadishu. Flint appeared again seemingly from nowhere, and this time he had a field dressing in his hand. Let me see that leg. It's fine, Master Sergeant. I didn't ask if it was fine. I said let me see it. She rolled up her pant leg, and he worked quickly, cleaning the wound and wrapping it tight. His hands were steady, professional. The hands of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in worse conditions. That was brave and stupid, Harlow. You know the difference. No, Master Sergeant. Brave is when you have to do something despite the risk. Stupid is when you don't have to, but you do it anyway. You just crossed the line from one to the other. He finished with the bandage and looked her in the eye. But I'm glad you did, because that rifle just bought us a few more minutes. And minutes matter in a fight like this. He glanced at Kemp, who was settling into position with the backup rifle. How's she shoot, Corporal? Won't know till I zero it. This one's not dialed to my eye. Then dial it fast. We're running out of time and targets of opportunity. Kemp fired twice, adjusted his scope, fired again, swore. I can't get dope on this thing. Windage is all wrong. Nash appeared at their position, his face grim. We've got QRF inbound, but they're 45 minutes out. Air support is grounded due to weather. We're on our own till they can get birds in the air. 45 minutes. Reese did the math automatically. Current ammunition, expenditure rate versus total rounds remaining factored against enemy fire, superiority, and degrading defensive positions. They wouldn't last 45 minutes. They'd be lucky to last 15. Kemp fired again, missed again, slammed his fist against the rock. God damn it, I can't get this rifle zeroed. Every shot's off by 3 inches. Flint looked at the rifle, looked at Kemp, looked at Reese, and in that moment, she saw him make a decision that would change everything. Harlow, you ever shoot long range? The question hung in the air like a challenge, like an accusation, like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for 24 years. She could lie. Should lie. Lying was safe. Lying kept her in her lane, kept her carrying ammunition, kept her out of the line of fire that came from breaking rules and challenging policies, and proving that the people who made those policies might have been wrong. But 18 men were pinned down in a kill box, and her father's voice was in her head reading from a photograph she'd just seen. We all go home, or none of us do. Yes, Master Sergeant, I shoot long range. How good? Good enough. Flint's eyes narrowed. That's not an answer. Reese looked at him, looked at Nash, looked at Kemp, struggling with a rifle, that wouldn't cooperate. Looked at the wounded being dragged to cover. Looked at the math that said they were all going to die unless something changed. I'm very good, Master Sergeant. 2,000 hours. Multiple calibers. I can make hits at 800 meters in field conditions. The silence that followed was broken only by gunfire. Nash spoke first. You're not qualified. You're not trained. Policy says. Flint cut him off. Policy says a lot of things, Lieutenant. Policy also says we don't leave men behind. Right now, I'm looking at 18 personnel in a kill box against superior numbers and elevation. We've got one rifle and a shooter who can't zero it. You want to quote policy, or you want to get these boys home? Nash's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Reese could see the calculation running behind his eyes, the weight of command and consequences, and the knowledge that whatever he decided next would either save lives or end them. Harlow, you miss we die. You understand that? Yes, sir. You're sure you can do this? She thought about her grandfather's range, about 2,000 hours of practice, about every morning she'd woken up before dawn to squeeze in an hour of trigger time before work, about the muscle memory and the mathematics and the strange calm that descended when she looked through a scope and the world became simple and clear. I won't miss, sir. Nash looked at Flint. Flint looked back steady and calm. She's Quinn Harlow's daughter. He never missed when it mattered. Nash took a breath. Give her the rifle. Kemp hesitated for just a second, and Reese saw the conflict in his face. Pride and professionalism warring with pragmatism and the will to live. Then he handed her the M110, and it settled into her hands like it had been waiting there all along. The weight was familiar. The balance was perfect. The scope was a Leupold Mark IV, same as she'd trained on, same magnification, same reticle. She could do this. She had to do this. Flint settled in beside her, pulling out his spotting scope. I'll call wind and distance. You make the shot. Understand? Yes, Master Sergeant. First target, ridge line, 11 o'clock, 620 meters. He's the one directing fire. You drop him, they'll lose coordination. Reese found the target through her scope. Chechen fighter older than most, with a radio pointing and shouting. The leader, the brain of this operation. She settled the crosshairs on his center mass, felt the wind on her face, 3 to 5 miles per hour left to right, calculated the correction, automatically adjusting half a mil to compensate. Her heart was pounding. Her hands wanted to shake. This wasn't paper targets. This was a human being in her crosshairs, a person with a life and a family and a future that was about to end if she squeezed this trigger. Her grandfather's voice in her head. Don't think about what it is. Think about what it means. Every shot you don't take is a shot someone else has to make. Every target you miss is a friend you lose. Her father's voice from a place she couldn't name. We all go home, or none of us do. She exhaled slowly, felt her heart rate drop, felt the calm descend like a blanket over fire, squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The scope jumped. The sound of the shot rolled across the valley like thunder. And 620 meters away, the Chechen commander's head snapped back and he fell out of view. For 2 seconds, the enemy fire actually stopped. 2 seconds of shocked silence while the fighters processed what had just happened. Then it resumed, but different now. Uncoordinated, panicked. Dawson Cole's voice carried across the position. Disbelief and hope mixed together. Holy shit. She smoked him. She fucking smoked him. Flint's voice in her ear, calm and professional. Second target, 9 o'clock, 580 meters behind the large rock. He's got a PKM. Take him before he gets set up. Reese was already transitioning, already finding the target, already making the calculations that turned chaos into geometry. This time, there was no hesitation, no debate about policy or qualification or whether she had permission. This time, there was only the scope and the target and the trigger. She fired. The machine gunner went down. She fired again. Another fighter trying to flank their position. And again. The enemy sniper on the far ridge, the one who'd started this whole nightmare. 710 meters. Moving target. Wind shifting. She led him by a body length. Adjusted for the angle. Waited for her heartbeat to pause between beats. Fired. Watched him tumble. The team was moving now, using her cover fire to reposition, to pull back the wounded, to establish a better defensive line. And Reese kept shooting, kept finding targets, kept making the rifle speak its simple language of ballistics and consequence. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was the moment everything changed. The moment she crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The moment she stopped being the girl who carried bullets and became the woman who fired them. But that was a problem for later. Right now, in this valley, under this sun, with her father's legacy burning in her blood, and 18 lives depending on her next shot, there was only one thing that mattered. She didn't miss. The rifle had become an extension of Reese's body, no longer a tool, but a limb, something that moved with her breath, and thought, and will. She cycled the bolt, felt the smooth mechanical action of steel on steel, felt the empty casing eject and tumble through the air to join the growing pile of brass at her feet. Each casing was a moment frozen in time, a decision made and executed, a life ended, so that others could continue. She'd stopped counting after 12. Flint's voice was steady in her ear, calling targets with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this so many times. The words had become pure reflex. Ridge 2, 7 o'clock, 800 meters. He's trying to set up on our 6. Reese found him through the scope. Young fighter, maybe 20, struggling with a Dragunov that was too big for his frame. He was fumbling with the magazine, hands shaking, and for a fraction of a second she saw him not as a target, but as a kid who'd made bad choices and was about to pay the permanent price. Then she saw Dawson Cole, dragging another wounded operator to cover, saw the blood trail in the dirt, saw the way the medic's hands were shaking as he tried to seal a sucking chest wound with a piece of plastic, and hope. The crosshair settled. Her finger found the trigger. The Dragunov fell silent before it ever spoke. Good hit. Stand by for next target. Nash was on the radio, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Sabre 6, Sabre 1. We are heavily engaged. Multiple casualties. Request immediate air support and medevac. How copy? The radio crackled with static and interference, and the voice of someone sitting in an air-conditioned operations center who'd never felt a bullet pass close enough to part their hair. Sabre 1, Sabre 6. Negative on air support. Weather system has moved in. All rotary wing assets grounded. Fixed wing cannot operate in current visibility. QRF is 30 minutes out. 30 minutes. The number hit Reese like a physical blow. She'd been counting ammunition in her head, doing the same math she'd been doing since the first shot. Current expenditure rate versus remaining supply. The equation didn't balance. They didn't have 30 minutes worth of bullets. They'd be dry in 15, maybe less. Nash's response was controlled, but she could hear the edge underneath. Sabre 6, be advised. We have 4 urgent surgical, 2 priority ammunition critical. We need those birds in the air now. Sabre 1, understand your situation, but weather is below minimums. We're working the problem. Sabre 6 out. Working the problem. That's what they called it when you were bleeding out in the dirt and the cavalry was stuck in the stable. Working the problem. Like it was a math equation instead of men dying. Reese pushed the anger down and focused on what she could control. The scope. The trigger. The targets that kept appearing on the ridges like they were being manufactured somewhere, just beyond her line of sight. Flint adjusted his spotting scope, and his voice carried a new edge of concern. Reese, we've got movement on the north ridge. Multiple personnel. They're trying to flank our position. She swung the rifle to acquire, found 6 fighters, moving in a tactical column using cover, intelligently advancing by bounds with one element, providing overwatch, while the other moved. These weren't amateur hour Taliban. These were trained soldiers who knew what they were doing. She took the lead man first. Center mass, at 600 meters. He dropped, and the column froze, suddenly, unsure, whether to advance or retreat. She used their hesitation to take the second man, then the third. The remaining three broke and ran for cover, and she let them go, conserving ammunition, making every round count. Good shooting. But we've got a bigger problem. Flint pointed to a position on the western ridge, and through her scope, Reese saw what had his attention. A PKM machine gun being set up, the crew working with practiced efficiency to establish a stable firing platform. Once that gun was operational, it would pour fire into their position at a rate that would chew through cover and bodies with equal indifference. Range is 850 meters. Wind is gusting 5 to 8 miles per hour from the right. You've got maybe 30 seconds before they're ready to fire. 850 meters. That was pushing the effective range of the M110, especially in gusting wind. But pushing effective range beat dying under machine gun fire. She found the gunner in her scope. He was the key. You could replace the gun, replace the ammunition, but you couldn't replace a trained gunner in the middle of a firefight. She watched him work, watched his hands move with the confidence of repetition, watched him load the belt and prepare to unleash hell. The wind gusted. She felt it on her face, watched the mirage through her scope shimmer and dance. Compensated, left elevated slightly to account for the distance and the downward angle. Her breathing slowed. The world contracted to the circle of her scope. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. She fired, watched the bullet's flight through the scope, that half-second journey across 850 meters of hostile air. Watched the gunner's head snap back. Watched the PKM crew scatter, their coordinated efficiency dissolving into self-preservation. Beside her, Flint let out a breath she hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was a hell of a shot, Harlow. Just lucky with the wind. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You've got both. Kemp had repositioned to their right, firing his M4 in controlled bursts, trying to suppress targets that Reese couldn't reach with the precision rifle. He burned through a magazine, reloaded, burned through another. Harlow, I need more mags. She grabbed 3 30-round magazines from her pack and low-crawled to his position, keeping below the line of fire. Rounds were cracking overhead, the supersonic snap like someone breaking tree branches directly above her head. She reached Kemp and shoved the magazines into his hand. That's the last of the 5.56. After this, your Winchester. Fuck. How much 7.62 you got for that rifle? She mentally inventoried her remaining ammunition. 3 magazines in her vest. 1 in the rifle. 20 rounds per magazine. 80 rounds. Give or take. That's not enough. It's what we've got. She crawled back to her position, and Flint was waiting with the next target acquisition. How much time until QRF? Flint checked his watch. 22 minutes. Might as well be 22 hours. Nash had pulled the team into a tighter defensive perimeter, consolidating their position around the wounded. 4 men were down with urgent surgical injuries, men who needed a hospital in the next 30 minutes, or the only thing they'd need was body bags. Dawson Cole was moving between them, doing battlefield medicine, with supplies that were running as low as the ammunition. The medic looked up and caught Reese's eye across the space between positions. He was covered in blood, his hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline, but he managed a thumbs up. She returned it, then went back to scanning for targets. The enemy fire had decreased in intensity, but not in accuracy. They'd learned that exposing themselves meant dying, so they were being more careful, picking their shots, making Reese work for every target. It was a war of patience now, a test of who would crack first under the pressure of time and dwindling resources. She found movement on the southern ridge. Young fighter trying to maneuver into a flanking position. He moved like he'd watched too many action movies, sprinting from cover to cover with his rifle held across his chest, thinking speed would protect him. She tracked him through the scope, led his movement, waited for him to commit to his next sprint. He broke from cover. She fired. He went down hard, tumbling across the rocky ground. She felt nothing. No satisfaction. No remorse. No triumph. Just the mechanical acknowledgement that the threat had been neutralized, and her team was safer by one enemy fighter. This was what her father had done. This was the clarity he'd found behind a scope, the reduction of complex moral questions to simple geometric ones. Target or not target? Threat or not threat. Shoot or don't shoot. She understood now why he'd been good at it. There was a terrible purity to it, a simplification of existence down to its most basic elements. Survival, protection, the mathematics of violence. Flint's voice cut through her thoughts. North Ridge, 11 o'clock, 780 meters. She swung to acquire and felt her breath catch. Another sniper. She could see him settling into position behind a Dragunov, could see the way he moved with professional economy, could see the quality of his hide and the intelligence of his positioning. This wasn't some kid with a rifle. This was a trained shooter, someone who'd done this before, someone who was about to make her life very difficult. They saw each other through their scopes at almost the same moment. She could feel it, that instant of recognition, when two predators realize they're hunting each other. He fired first. The round cracked past her head so close she felt the pressure wave, felt the displacement of air that marked a near miss measured in inches. She jerked back instinctively, breaking her position, losing her sight picture. By the time she reacquired, he'd moved. Professional. Smart. Never stay where you shoot from. I've got him, Flint said, tracking through his spotting scope. 6 o'clock from his last position, behind the split rock. Reese found the split rock, found the shadow behind it, found the slight irregularity that might be a human form, or might be nothing but imagination and hope. She fired, saw rock chips fly, but no body. The return shot came from a completely different position, 30 meters from where she'd aimed. The round hit the boulder 6 inches from her head, spraying her with stone fragments that cut her face and hands. He's playing mobile, Flint said, moving after every shot. You need to predict where he'll go next. Reese wiped blood from a cut above her eye and tried to think like the enemy sniper. If she were in his position, with a team pinned down and a single counter sniper to deal with, where would she move high ground? Always high ground. Better angles, better view of the battlefield. She scanned upward from his last position, looking for places that offered elevation and cover. Found 3 possibilities. Watched them all. Saw movement in the 3rd position. Just a flicker. Just the suggestion of something shifting. She didn't fire. Waited. Let him think she hadn't seen him. Let him settle. Let him get comfortable. He raised his rifle. She could see the barrel now, see the scope, see him starting to acquire her position. She fired. 790 meters, upward angle. Wind gusting hard. The shot felt good. Leaving the barrel felt right in a way that transcended conscious thought. Through her scope, she saw him jerk, saw the rifle fall, saw him slump. She waited. 5 seconds. 10, 15. He didn't move. Confirm kill, Flint said quietly. That's one less problem. But there were still so many more. The ammunition in her rifle was running low. She could feel the weight difference and the magazine could count the rounds without looking. 15 left, maybe 16. She'd gone through 65 rounds in less than 20 minutes. 65 rounds that represented 65 decisions, 65 moments where she chose to end one life to preserve others. The math was simple, but the weight was beginning to accumulate somewhere in her chest. Somewhere she'd deal with later. Somewhere that wasn't now. Contact left, Nash's voice carried across the position. Multiple personnel advancing from the western ridge. Reese swung her rifle to acquire. Saw 8 fighters moving in a coordinated assault, using fire and maneuver tactics that spoke of military training. They were making a push, trying to overwhelm the defensive position before reinforcements arrived. She started engaging targets, picking them off as they exposed themselves. But there were too many, and they were moving too fast. She dropped 1, 2, 3, but the others kept coming, kept advancing, kept closing the distance. Kemp was firing now, burning through his last magazine. Nash was shooting. Every man who could hold a rifle was engaging, trying to create enough volume of fire to stop the assault. But they were running dry. Reese took another shot. Another target down. Her bolt locked back. Empty magazine. She dropped it, reached for a fresh one. Her hands found the magazine pouch on her vest. Empty. She grabbed her pack, pulled out the last magazine she had. 20 rounds. That was it. That was all that stood between the team and being overrun. She seated the magazine, released the bolt, acquired the next target. A fighter was sprinting toward the Nash's position, 70 meters out, and closing. She let him fired, watched him tumble. Another fighter. 60 meters, moving fast. Fired. Down. They kept coming. She fired again. Again. Each shot bought seconds, bought meters, bought time they didn't have. The bolt locked back. She'd burned through 15 rounds in less than a minute. 5 rounds left. 8 fighters still advancing. The math didn't work. She could hear the fear in her own breathing, could feel the panic trying to claw its way up from her stomach to her throat. 5 rounds. 8 targets. No room for misses. No time for second chances. Flint's hand settled on her shoulder. Breathe, Reese. Your father faced worse at Mogadishu. 2 rounds left, 4 targets. You know what he did? She shook her head, unable to speak. He made them count. Not just the bullets, the targets. He chose who needed to die so others could live. You've got 5 rounds. You don't need to kill all 8. You need to kill the right 5. She looked at the advancing fighters through her scope, saw them not as identical threats, but as individuals, saw their positions, saw their weapons, saw who was leading, who was following, who was dangerous, and who was just filling space. Found the squad leader, the one directing the others. Put him down with her first shot. The advance faltered as command dissolved. Found the machine gunner carrying the PKM. Second shot. He fell, and the heavy weapon clattered across the rocks. Found the 2 fighters, who were actually shooting with accuracy, while the others just sprayed bullets. Third shot, fourth shot. 1 round left. 4 fighters remaining, but they were breaking now, their coordination shattered, their advance stalled. They dove for cover, suddenly more concerned with survival than assault. Reese kept her last round, chambered and waited. Watched. Let them think about their dead. Let them think about what it cost to keep pushing. After 30 seconds, they started pulling back, dragging their wounded, retreating to the ridge positions. The assault was broken. She'd held with 5 bullets, in the knowledge that her father had done the same thing, had made the same choices, had lived by the same terrible mathematics. Flint squeezed her shoulder. Good shooting, but we're still in trouble. Your Winchester on 7.62, and the next wave won't be scared off by ghosts. Nash appeared at their position, his face streaked with powder residue and dirt. Harlow, I need you to fall back with the team. We're consolidating at the secondary position. What about covering fire? You're out of ammo. You've done your part, more than your part. Reese looked at the ridge lines at the enemy positions that were still active, still dangerous. Looked at the wounded being prepped for movement. Looked at the 400 meters of open ground between their current position and the fallback point. If we move without suppression, they'll cut us apart. I know, but we don't have a choice. QRF is 15 minutes out. We need to get to the alternate LZ. 15 minutes. Forever and no time at all. I've got 1 round left. Nash looked at her, then at the ridges, then back at her. 1 round won't stop what's coming. Then I better make it count. Before he could argue, movement on the eastern ridge caught her attention. Through her scope, she saw fighters regrouping, saw a new figure among them, tall and moving with authority. He was directing the others, pointing toward their position, organizing what looked like a final coordinated assault. Their commander, the one who'd planned this ambush, who'd waited for them to walk into the kill box, who'd orchestrated everything from the first shot. If he lived, he'd coordinate the next attack. He'd vector fire onto the team as they moved to the fallback position. He'd kill what was left of them before the QRF arrived. If he died, chaos. Confusion. A window of opportunity measured in precious minutes. Master Sergeant, can you range that tall figure on the eastern ridge, the one giving orders? Flint glassed the position. 920 meters. That's past effective range for the M110. Can I hit him? In perfect conditions, maybe. But the wind is gusting, you're shooting uphill, and you've got 1 round. Miss, and we're out of options. Reese settled behind the rifle and found the target. 920 meters. She could see him clearly through the scope, could see him gesturing to his fighters, could see the radio in his hand. The wind gusted. She felt it on her face, judged the speed and direction. 8 miles per hour, maybe 10, coming from her right front. The angle was severe. Shooting uphill meant the bullet would impact high. She'd need to compensate, hold low trust the math. 1 round, 1 chance. She thought about her father at Mogadishu, facing the same calculation. Thought about Flint's words. made them count. She made every adjustment she could. Windage, elevation, angle, calculated and recalculated until the numbers felt right. Settled into her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled, letting her heart rate drop, letting the calm descend. Found the space between heartbeats and fired her last round. The rifle bucked, the scope jumped, and 920 meters away, across a valley filled with dust and death and the accumulated weight of 2 decades of war, the enemy commander's head snapped back and he fell. The radio slipped from his hand and bounced across the rocks. For a moment, everything stopped. The enemy fighters stood frozen, staring at their fallen leader. The team held position, watching to see what would happen next. Then the enemy line broke, not a retreat, but a collapse. Fighters abandoning their positions, grabbing their wounded, fleeing back over the ridges toward whatever sanctuary lay beyond. The ambush was over. Nash was staring at her with an expression somewhere between shock and something that might have been respect. Did you just... At 900 meters, with one round, Reese safed the rifle and stood up, her legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline dump. We should move to the fallback position while we have the chance, sir. She started walking before he could respond, before anyone could ask questions she didn't have answers for. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up. Her face stung from the rock chips. Her leg throbbed where she'd been grazed. But she was alive. They were all alive. And the sound of helicopters was finally growing in the distance, rotors beating the air cavalry, arriving late, but arriving nonetheless. Flint fell into step beside her. Your father's last shot at Mogadishu was at 900 meters. Took down a technical with a 50 cal. Bought enough time for the extraction. Reese didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the parallel, the echo of history repeating across 19 years and 2 continents. He never came home from that shot, Flint continued. Took 2 rounds while displacing. But those 11 men he saved, they all made it. Every single one. They reached the fallback position, and Reese finally allowed herself to collapse against a boulder, the rifle across her lap, her body finally registering all the damage and exhaustion. Dawson appeared with his med kit and started cleaning the cuts on her face without asking permission. You saved my ass back there, Harlow. Saved all our asses. Just did my job. Your job was carrying ammo. My job is whatever keeps us alive. He finished bandaging her face and moved on to the next wounded man. The helicopters were close now, the sound of salvation growing louder. Reese closed her eyes and let herself really breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. When she opened them, she found Nash standing over her. Harlow, I need to know. How long have you been able to shoot like that? Does it matter, sir? Yeah, it matters. She met his eyes. Since I was 17, 2,000 hours of practice. Never thought I'd use it. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because policy said I wasn't allowed to. And I learned a long time ago that being good at something doesn't mean you get to do it. Nash was quiet for a long moment. Policy's about to change, Harlow. After today, after what you just did, I'm going to make sure of it. The first helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and noise, and the wounded were loaded with practiced efficiency. Reese watched them go, watched Cole climb aboard with his patients, watched the bird lift off, and bank toward the hospital at Bagram. The second helicopter settled, and the QRF team poured out fresh and ready for a fight that was already over. Their team sergeant approached Nash. What's your situation, Lieutenant? Secure. Threat neutralized. We're ready for extract. How many casualties? 6 wounded, no KIA. Nash glanced at Reese. Thanks to my sniper. The QRF sergeant followed his gaze, saw Reese sitting against the boulder with her rifle, saw her face bandaged and bloody, saw her uniform torn and dusty. I thought Kemp was your sniper. He was. Now Harlow is. The helicopter ride back to base was loud, and Reese was grateful for it. Loud meant she didn't have to talk, didn't have to explain, didn't have to process what had just happened. She could just sit with the rifle across her lap and watch Afghanistan scroll past through the open door. Flint sat across from her. At some point during the flight, he reached into his vest and pulled out the photograph again. Her father and him, young and alive before Mogadishu, took one and left the other. He held it out to her. Keep it. He'd want you to have it. She took the photograph with hands that were finally steady and looked at her father's face. Really looked at it. Saw the same eyes she saw in the mirror. Saw the same slight smile. Saw the ghost that had haunted her entire life finally become something real and tangible. On the back, her father's handwriting, "We all go home or none of us do." Today they'd all come home because she'd made sure of it. The field hospital at Bagram smelled like disinfectant and blood, and the particular staleness that came from air conditioning units working overtime against the Afghan heat. Reese sat on the edge of a cot while a medic she didn't know stitched the cut above her eyebrow with movements that were efficient but not gentle. Each pull of the suture felt like someone was trying to sew her thoughts together, trying to keep everything from spilling out. She'd been awake for 36 hours. Her hands had finally stopped shaking somewhere over Kandahar province on the flight back, but now they felt disconnected from her body, like they belonged to someone else. Someone who'd killed 18 people in less than an hour. Someone who'd looked through a scope and reduced human beings to geometry problems and solved them with 168 grain boat-tail hollow points traveling at 2,800 feet per second. "You're lucky," the medic said, snipping the last suture. "Another inch, and that rock fragment would have taken your eye." Lucky. The word felt obscene. 4 men were in surgery right now because they'd walked into an ambush. 6 more were recovering from wounds that would leave scars, physical and otherwise. And she was lucky because she could still see out of both eyes. "Thanks, Doc. Get some rest. Commander wants to see you tomorrow at 0900. After the medic left, Reese lay back on the cot and stared at the canvas ceiling of the hospital tent. She could hear the sounds of the base outside helicopters, landing and departing vehicles, moving equipment, the distant crack of rounds being fired at the range. Normal sounds. The sounds of a military installation at war. Conducting the business of organized violence with bureaucratic efficiency. Her rifle was locked in the armory. They'd taken it from her when she'd arrived, logged it, tagged it, secured it, like evidence. Which maybe it was. Evidence of what she'd done, what she was capable of doing. She closed her eyes and saw the Chechen commander through her scope, saw the moment the bullet hit, saw him fall, saw the young fighter trying to flank their position, saw the machine gunner setting up his PKM, saw all 18 of them frozen in the moment before their deaths, before she'd made the decision that ended them. Sleep, when it came, was full of crosshairs and calculations and the sound of her own breathing between heartbeats. She woke to find Flint sitting in a chair beside her cot, reading a paperback western with a gunfighter on the cover. The morning light was filtering through the tent fabric, turning everything the color of old photographs. "What time is it?" "Oh, 7:30. Figured I'd make sure you didn't sleep through your meeting with the commander." Reese sat up, feeling every bruise and cut and strained muscle from the previous day. Her left calf throbbed where the shrapnel had grazed it. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. Her face felt tight where the stitches pulled. "How are the wounded?" "All gonna make it. Cole did good work, keeping them stable till we got birds on station. You did good work, keeping them alive long enough for Cole to work." He closed the book and set it aside. "You sleep okay. Define okay." "Fair enough." He stood and stretched, joints popping. "Get cleaned up. Uniforms on the chair. Commander Wales doesn't like to be kept waiting." 45 minutes later, Reese stood at attention in front of Commander Wales's desk in the headquarters building. The office was sparse. A metal desk, filing cabinets, a map of Afghanistan on one wall with pins marking ongoing operations. Wales himself was 50-something gray at the temples, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same rock as Mount Rushmore. Nash and Flint stood to one side. The presence of witnesses meant this was official, whatever it was. Wales studied her for a long moment before speaking. "At ease, Corporal Harlow. Have a seat." She sat in the metal chair across from his desk, keeping her back straight despite the pain. Wales opened a folder on his desk, Lieutenant Nash has filed an after-action report that makes some pretty extraordinary claims. 18 confirmed kills, enemy assault broken, team extracted with no KIA. All of this accomplished by an ammunition bearer who, according to her personnel file, has never attended sniper school and is not qualified as a designated marksman. He looked up from the folder. Want to tell me how that happened? Reese chose her words carefully. I've had extensive private training in long-range shooting, sir. When the tactical situation required it, I utilized those skills. Extensive private training. 2,000 hours according to what you told Lieutenant Nash. That's more training than most of our designated marksmen receive. Where'd you get this training? My grandfather taught me starting when I was 7, sir. Korean War veteran. After he passed, I continued on my own. Civilian, ranges, private instruction, independent study. Wales leaned back in his chair. And you never thought to mention this during your military career? Never thought it might be relevant information? I mentioned it during basic training, sir. Was told that women weren't qualified for sniper positions per current policy. So, I focused on the job I was assigned. Which was ammunition bearer. Yes, sir. Wales was quiet for a moment, and Reese could hear the air conditioning struggling against the heat. Do you know why we have policies about women in direct combat roles, Corporal? I assume it's related to physical standards and unit cohesion, sir. That's the official line. The real reason is politics and bureaucracy, and a lot of old men in Washington who've never been shot at making decisions about who gets to shoot back. I've been fighting those policies for years because I've seen too many talented soldiers wasted in jobs that don't utilize their full capabilities. He opened another folder and pulled out a photograph. Satellite imagery of the valley where they'd been ambushed. Red circles marked enemy positions. Blue circles marked friendly positions. Lines of fire were drawn in to show fields of engagement. Intelligence analysis estimates there were between 22 and 25 enemy fighters in that ambush. Professional soldiers, most likely Chechen mercenaries with extensive combat experience. They had superior numbers, superior positioning, and the element of surprise. By every tactical analysis, your team should have been wiped out. He pulled out another photograph. This one showed the valley after the engagement. Bodies marked with yellow tags, equipment scattered, the aftermath of violence. Instead, we have 18 enemy KIA, 7 wounded, and the rest routed. Total friendly casualties. 6 wounded, expected to make full recovery. The difference between those two outcomes is you and what you did with a rifle you weren't supposed to be holding. Wales closed the folders and looked directly at her. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry. I'm also recommending immediate policy review regarding women in combat specialties. And I'm offering you a slot at sniper school starting next month at Fort Benning. The words hung in the air like smoke. Silver Star. Policy review. Sniper school. Everything she'd trained for. Everything she'd wanted. Everything that had been out of reach because of her gender and the policies that governed it. She should have been elated. Should have been grateful. Should have been ready to accept immediately. Instead, she heard herself say, I'd like to think about it, sir. Wales raised an eyebrow. Think about what exactly? The medal or the school? The school, sir. The medal isn't my decision. Most soldiers would jump at this opportunity. I'm not most soldiers, sir. Wales smiled slightly, the first break in his Mount Rushmore expression. No, you're certainly not. You've got 72 hours to decide. Dismissed. She stood saluted and turned to leave. Nash and Flint followed her out into the hallway. Nash spoke first. You're actually going to think about it. About sniper school. Yes, sir. Can I ask why? She stopped walking and turned to face him. Because yesterday, I carried ammunition and fired a rifle and treated wounded and helped coordinate movement. I did everything that needed doing to keep the team alive. If I go to sniper school, I become just a shooter. One specialty, one role, and maybe that's not what I want. Nash looked like he wanted to argue, but Flint put a hand on his shoulder. Let her think, Lieutenant. She's earned that much. Reese spent the next 3 days in a strange limbo. She wasn't officially assigned to anything. Wasn't back on the duty roster, existed in the gap between who she'd been and who she might become. She spent the time doing physical therapy on her leg, getting the stitches removed from her face, and thinking. The story of the ambush had spread through the base with the speed of all good combat stories. She couldn't walk to the chow hall without people staring, couldn't sit in the rec tent without someone wanting to buy her a coffee and hear about it. The attention made her skin crawl. On the second day, she visited the wounded in the hospital. Cole was there, his arm in a sling, but otherwise intact. When he saw her, he grinned. The hero returns. Heard Wales offered you sniper school. News travels fast. It's a small base and you're famous. You gonna take it? Haven't decided. Cole's expression turned serious. Can I tell you something? When I was working on those guys, when I was trying to keep blood inside bodies where it belonged, I kept hearing your rifle. Crack, pause, crack, like a metronome. And every time I heard it, I knew someone wasn't shooting at us anymore. You gave me time to work, time to save them. He gestured at the other cots, where wounded soldiers were recovering. Those guys are alive because you're a good shot, but they're also alive because you hauled the ammo that kept everyone else shooting, because you helped me treat wounds when I needed another pair of hands. You were everything we needed when we needed it. Is there a point to this, Doc? The point is that being one thing, even one thing really well, isn't always better than being capable of everything. You go to sniper school, you become a sniper. That's valuable. But what you did out there, being able to switch roles as needed, that's irreplaceable. Reese thought about that conversation as she walked back to her quarters. Thought about it as she cleaned her rifle, the one they'd returned to her, after photographing it and documenting it and treating it like Exhibit A in whatever case they were building. On the third day, Flint found her at the rifle range working through dry fire drills with an M4. He watched for a few minutes before speaking. Your father used to do that. Dry fire practice. Said it kept the muscle memory sharp. Did he ever regret it? Becoming a sniper? Flint considered the question. He never said so to me, but I think near the end in Mogadishu, he wished he could have been more. Wished he could have done more than just shoot. He was a good soldier, trapped in a narrow specialty. And you think I should avoid that? I think you should do what feels right. But I'll tell you what I know your father's last words to me after he got hit were, make sure they all get home. Not, get my killer, or finish the mission. Just make sure everyone goes home. He cared about the team more than the specialty. He paused. Wales is a good man, and sniper school is a good opportunity. But you've got something rare, Reese. You've got the ability to be whatever the situation needs. That's worth more than any school can teach. That night, Reese pulled out the photograph Flint had given her. Her father and Flint, young and alive, smiling in the sun. She read the words on the back for the 100th time. We all go home or none of us do. She finally understood what that meant. It wasn't about being the best shooter or the most specialized soldier. It was about doing whatever it took to accomplish the mission that mattered most, bringing everyone home. She made her decision. The next morning, she stood in Commander Wales's office again. I appreciate the offer of sniper school, sir, but I'd like to decline. Wales didn't look surprised. Can I ask why? Because I think I can do more good staying with my team, staying versatile. Being able to shoot when that's what's needed, but also being able to haul ammo and treat wounds and do whatever else keeps people alive. You understand that declining this opportunity might mean you never get another one. The policy might change, but slots are limited. I understand, sir, but I've thought about what I want to be, and it's not just a sniper. It's a complete soldier, someone who can adapt to whatever the mission requires. Wales studied her for a long moment. Your father would be proud of you. Not because you're a good shot, though you are, but because you understand what really matters. He pulled out a small box from his desk drawer. The Silver Star recommendation is still going through, but this is something I can give you now. He opened the box to reveal Sergeant Stripes. Congratulations on your promotion, Sergeant Harlow. You've earned it. 2 weeks later, Reese stood in formation with her team as Commander Wales pinned the Silver Star to her uniform. The citation read in part, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. Sergeant Harlow's actions were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. After the ceremony, Nash pulled her aside. You know the policy changed this morning. Pentagon officially opened all combat specialties to women. You're part of the reason why. I just did my job, sir. Yeah, but you did it in a way that made it impossible for them to keep pretending women couldn't handle combat. You broke their argument just by being better than most of the men. I'm not better than most of the men, sir. I'm just trained differently. Nash smiled. That's exactly the attitude that makes you valuable. No ego, just competence. Your team is lucky to have you. 6 months later, Reese found herself back in Afghanistan, back with her team, back in the dust and heat and constant threat. But things were different now. She carried ammunition when they needed it. She served as designated marksman when the situation required precision fire. She helped Cole with casualties. She planned operations with Nash. She'd become what she wanted to be, not a specialist, but a complete soldier. They were on patrol in Helmand Province when they took contact from a tree line, sustained automatic weapons fire, multiple enemy positions, the familiar chaos of an ambush. Reese dropped her pack and grabbed her rifle in one smooth motion, muscle memory and training taking over. She found a position with good sight lines and started engaging targets while the rest of the team maneuvered. Crack. Enemy machine gunner down at 600 meters. Crack. Fighter trying to flank neutralized at 400 meters. Crack. Commander directing fire eliminated at 700 meters. Between shots, she was passing ammunition to the other shooters, calling out enemy positions, coordinating fields of fire, being everything the team needed. After the engagement, as they were policing up and preparing to move, a young private approached her. Fresh in country, couldn't be more than 19. Sergeant Harlow, I just wanted to say, what you did back there was incredible. The shooting, the coordination, everything. How'd you learn to do all that? Reese thought about her answer, thought about her father and Flint and her grandfather and all the people who'd taught her that being a soldier meant more than just one skill. Practice, and understanding that the mission isn't about being the best at one thing. It's about being good enough at everything that matters. Will you teach me? She looked at the kid, saw the eagerness and fear and determination mixed together, saw herself 6 months ago carrying ammunition and wondering if she'd ever get the chance to prove what she could do. Yeah, I'll teach you. But first lesson, grab that ammo can and let's get moving. Everything else builds from being able to carry the load. 3 months later, she was training a group of new arrivals, male and female, teaching them the fundamentals of combat operations. Nash had put her in charge of the program, recognizing that she had something valuable to teach about versatility and adaptation. She stood in front of the class, her silver star visible on her uniform, her sergeant stripes newly pressed. Most of you came here thinking you'd be one thing, a shooter or a medic or a radio operator or whatever your MOS says, and that's fine. That's what the Army needs from you most of the time. She paused. But there's going to come a day when what the Army needs and what your team needs are two different things. And on that day, you're going to have to decide whether you're going to hide behind your MOS and watch people die, or whether you're going to do whatever it takes to bring everyone home. She pulled out her rifle, the same M110 she'd used in the ambush. I was an ammo bearer. That was my job. That was what I was assigned to do. But when the situation required it, I picked up this rifle and did what needed to be done. Not because I wanted to prove something or make a point about gender politics or any of that. I did it because 18 enemy fighters were trying to kill my team, and I had the skills to stop them. She set the rifle down and looked at each of them in turn. Some of you are going to be amazing at one thing. That's valuable, and the Army needs that. But some of you are going to be good at many things, and that's valuable in a different way. Don't let policy or expectations or other people's limitations define what you're capable of doing. After the class, a female private approached her, nervous but determined. Sergeant Harlow, I want to be like you. I want to learn to shoot like that. Reese smiled. First, tell me what your MOS is. Combat medic, Sergeant. Good. Then your first priority is being the best medic you can be, because that's what your team needs most. But in your off time, if you want to learn to shoot, I'll teach you. Just like I'll teach you to fix vehicles and navigate by stars and do a dozen other things that might save your life or someone else's someday. Why teach all of that instead of specializing? Because wars aren't won by specialists. They're won by soldiers who can adapt to whatever the situation demands. Be a medic first, but be a soldier always. The private saluted and walked away, and Reese felt something settle in her chest. This was what her father had wanted, what Flint had preserved by carrying that photograph for 18 years, what her grandfather had started when he taught a 7-year-old girl to shoot. Legacy wasn't about being the best at one thing. It was about passing on the knowledge and skills that let the next generation survive. 1 year after the ambush, Reese stood in her barracks at Bagram, packing her gear for rotation back to the States. Her deployment was ending. Nash had already rotated out. Cole was at Fort Sam Houston teaching combat medicine. Kemp was at sniper school, finally getting the instructor position he'd wanted. And Reese was going home. Flint appeared in her doorway, moving quietly as always. Heard you're heading back stateside. Yeah. 30 days leave, then Fort Campbell for training command. Training command. Teaching the next generation. Seemed like the right move. Someone's got to teach these kids to be versatile. Flint handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. Open it when you get home, not before. She took the package, felt the weight of it, the solid rectangular shape. What is it? Something that belongs to you. Something I should have given you a long time ago. He turned to leave, then paused. Your father would be proud of you, Reese. Not because you can shoot, not because you got the medal, but because you understood that being a warrior isn't about the weapons you carry. It's about the people you protect. After he left, Reese finished packing. The rifle went into its case. The silver star went into a box with her other decorations. The photograph of her father stayed in her breast pocket, close to her heart. 30 hours later, she was on a transport plane heading east, leaving Afghanistan behind, but carrying everything she'd learned in the dust and blood and impossible decisions. When she finally made it home to Wyoming, to the small house where her mother still lived, she opened Flint's package in private. Inside was a leather journal, worn with age and use. On the first page, in handwriting, she recognized from the photograph her father had written, "Field notes and lessons learned. For whoever comes after me, may you shoot straight and bring everyone home." Quinn Harlow, 1993. The rest of the journal was filled with her father's observations about shooting, about tactics, about leadership and teamwork, and what it meant to be a soldier. The last entry was dated October the 2nd, 1993, the day before Mogadishu. Tomorrow we're going into the city. Intel says it'll be quick and clean. I don't trust it. Something feels wrong. But we'll do our jobs, and we'll bring everyone home. That's what matters. Not the mission, not the politics, not the glory. Just bringing everyone home. If I don't make it back, I hope whoever reads this understands we're not weapons. We're warriors. There's a difference. Reese closed the journal and sat for a long time, feeling the weight of her father's words, feeling the connection across 2 decades and 2 wars. She pulled out her own journal and began to write. Dad, I got your message. Took me 24 years in a firefight in Afghanistan, but I finally understand. We're not weapons, we're warriors. And warriors do whatever it takes to bring everyone home. I'm going to spend the rest of my career teaching that to anyone who'll listen. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for the legacy. I'll make sure it continues. Love, Reese. The next morning, she stood at Arlington National Cemetery in front of a simple headstone that read Quinn Harlow, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army Rangers, 1968 to 1993. Medal of Honor. Beloved father and husband. She knelt and placed her silver star on the grave beside flowers her mother had left earlier. Hey, Dad. Her voice was quiet in the morning stillness. I know we never got to meet, but Flint gave me your journal, gave me your lessons, gave me the chance to become what you wanted me to be. She touched the cold stone. I did what you asked. I brought them all home. 18 enemy down, 0 friendly KIA, and I'm going to keep doing it, keep teaching it, keep making sure your lesson survives. She stood and saluted. We're not weapons. We're warriors, and warriors protect their own. Behind her, the wind moved through the cemetery, rustling flags and carrying the weight of promises made by those who wear the uniform. We all go home, or none of us do. Her father's promise. Her promise now? The promise she'd teach to every soldier who'd listen. Reese Harlow walked away from her father's grave carrying his rifle, his journal, and his legacy, forward into a future where warriors weren't defined by what they carried, but by what they were willing to do for those beside them. She was no longer just the ammo bearer. She was no longer just the sniper. She was a warrior, complete and whole, and that was enough.